was fathered by the defendant's grandson, who was tragically killed 2 months ago. Claim your granddaughter knows for a fact your grandson was sterile.
Right after Parrish got killed, she went for Social Security, and she wanted a father for her girls.
We lived together, everything, we were in a relationship. He asked me to marry him. They're saying he was sterile. He was never told by a doctor.
He's just like, Chaz, I don't even think I can have kids.
Wasn't together when Parrish was deceased. He had another girlfriend. They was not together.
We lived together. We were a family. He told everyone my girls were his stepdaughters. Through my whole pregnancy, all the doctor's appointments, everything.
And when
in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, the tension begins long before the results are revealed. Every person who steps into this environment carries a story, some shaped by loss, some by fear, some by hope, and others by the haunting possibility that the truth may destroy what little they have left. This case opens with exactly that kind of pressure. A young mother arriving with a desperate determination to validate her child's identity, and a grieving family arriving with equally firm intentions to protect the legacy of their late son. The courtroom atmosphere is charged. On one side stands a woman who insists that her late fiancé is the father of her baby. She comes prepared with documents, memories, promises, and a conviction that the child she carries into the courtroom deserves legal acknowledgement and emotional belonging. On the opposite side sits the deceased man's family, visibly conflicted, struggling between honoring the son they lost and guarding the inheritance and name they feel responsible for. Their doubts are not merely emotional. They are layered with assumptions, long-held beliefs, and unspoken grievances. As they settle into their seats, it becomes clear that this case is not just about biology. It is about pride, suspicion, grief, and the unresolved fractures that often appear when families face the evidence stage in divorce case-style conflicts. Even when the parents were never married, Judge Lauren Lake, known for balancing compassion with sharp judicial insight, listens carefully as both sides outline their reasons for appearing. The mother states plainly that she and the deceased man were in a genuine relationship built on shared goals and daily life. She references the voluntary paternity acknowledgement he signed before his passing, a document she believes speaks louder than anyone else's doubts. His family challenges her claims immediately, suggesting she has ulterior motives tied to land, oil interests, and financial trusts. They insinuate that her arrival in court is less about truth and more about inheritance, a narrative strengthened by their assertion that their grandson believed he was sterile. The grandmother's perspective, shaped by years of raising her grandson, introduces another emotionally heavy layer. She says she stayed silent during his life because she didn't want to cause him pain, but now that he's gone, she feels compelled to speak her truth. Judge Lake examines each of these perspectives through the wider lens of the concept of justice in jurisprudence. She understands that courts are not just places where facts are evaluated. They are arenas where humans confront reality, often for the first time. She also knows that modern relationships, especially those fraught with conflict, secrets, and miscommunication, require deeper scrutiny. The mother's testimony touches upon themes frequently discussed in truth changes. Everything, podcasts, moments where individuals face the consequences of long-buried emotions or assumptions. She reveals that her late fiancé struggled with self-doubt, believing his inability to have children stemmed from past failures rather than medical certainty. This detail complicates the narrative. If the man himself was unsure, the family's firm stance suddenly appears rooted more in personal hurt than factual evidence. As the accounts unravel, all parties begin referencing past scenarios. that resemble the themes in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, especially discussions about how the relationship between law and justice often hinges on the interpretation of human behavior rather than pure legality. Accusations of cheating surface. Claims about motives are challenged. Each side naturally turns to the concept of adverse inference, the idea that silence, hesitation, or missing details might reveal more than spoken words. Judge Lake listens, guiding the litigants through their emotional storms, reminding them that the court cannot rely on speculation. Only evidence matters. The grandmother speaks from a place of hurt and history. She explains that she raised her grandson single-handedly, filling roles of mother, father, and guardian. She recalls his longing for a child and her private doubts that she never voiced. Her testimony has echoes of Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals acknowledge that sometimes the choices they make, whether silence or confrontation, stem from past trauma rather than present reality. She insists that she loved the baby, but struggled to see a resemblance, a detail that weighs heavily on her perception of truth. Judge Lauren Lake, observing the emotional overflow, anchors the conversation with clarity. She explains how DNA test cheating stories often come from assumptions, miscommunication, and external influence, and this courtroom has shades of those dynamics. The mother asserts that the deceased man was involved during the pregnancy, accompanied her to appointments, embraced her older daughters as his stepchildren, and prepared for their shared life. She paints a picture of intention and commitment. Meanwhile, the family counters with episodes from his past that suggests instability, conflicting relationships, and emotional turbulence. Both narratives hold elements of truth, as is common in complex family disputes. At moments, the courtroom atmosphere resembles discussions featured in the Divorce Course podcast. Not because a marriage is dissolving, but because the themes distrust, financial concerns, emotional wounds, conflicting testimonies mirror those seen in contentious separation cases. Judge Lake reminds both sides that the court is not here to solve old emotional grievances. It is here to answer a single question rooted in law: whether the child is biologically connected to the deceased man's bloodline. The intensity grows as the mother reveals she learned of her fiancé's death through social media rather than through the family. This detail stirs Judge Lake's attention. It speaks to broken communication channels, lingering resentment, and fractures that often appear in adoption stories' full episodes, where unknown histories and sudden revelations shape identity. It also exposes the underlying conflict. This is not merely a paternity dispute, it is a struggle between two grieving groups who both believe they are protecting the truth, as the grandmother recounts. The day she learned of her grandson's death and the emotional chaos that followed, the courtroom feels a collective weight. Her grief is palpable. Her loyalty to her grandson unwavering. Her doubts, however, remain rooted in belief rather than evidence. Judge Lake carefully walks her through the importance of separating emotion from legal reasoning, acknowledging her pain but reinforcing the significance of factual proof. Then attention turns to the father of the deceased man, who steps forward with a calm, reflective presence. He admits shortcomings, regrets past choices, and acknowledges the complexities in his son's life. He expresses a heartfelt belief that the child resembles him, a statement that carries emotional power but requires scientific validation. He testifies that his son openly claimed the child as his own. His words contrast sharply with the grandmother's doubts. deepening the divide within the family itself. Throughout the testimony, Judge Lake continuously returns to the fundamentals of jurisprudence, evidence, credibility, and fairness. She addresses the importance of removing assumptions, especially in cases clouded by grief, personal history, and financial implications. The stakes are high, not because of the oil trust or inheritance, but because a child's identity hangs in the balance. She reminds the courtroom that Supreme Court child support rulings around paternity emphasize stability, clarity, and the best interests of the child, values that must guide this case as well. As both sides reach emotional exhaustion, Judge Lake prepares to introduce the only element capable of cutting through bias and speculation: the DNA test. This moment, familiar to viewers who follow such cases, carries the entire weight of the courtroom's tension. For the mother, it represents validation. For the family, it represents either confirmation of their fears or the collapse of their long-held beliefs. For Judge Lake, it represents the ultimate tool of truth, the scientific anchor that aligns with her philosophy that justice must rest on proof, not pain. As the DNA envelope rests on Judge Lauren Lake's bench, the courtroom holds its breath. The mother looks anxious yet hopeful, gripping onto the belief that science will affirm everything she has endured. The late father's family sits rigidly, anticipating either relief or devastation. Judge Lake, who has overseen countless paternity disputes, seems almost solemn as she prepares the court for the significance of what is about to be revealed. She reiterates that in matters like these, truth changes everything, not only relationships, but futures, identities, and legacies, before revealing the results. Judge Lake reflects aloud on how the modern legal system handles cases rooted in emotional turmoil, misinformation, and long-standing assumptions. She mentions how, in various legal discussions, like those explored on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, there is a powerful reminder that the relationship between law and justice demands objectivity even when emotions run wild. She reinforces that this courtroom is not a place for judgment of personal character, but a place where evidence reigns supreme. This emphasis on evidence aligns with doctrines often highlighted in courses on jurisprudence, especially the idea that the concept of justice in jurisprudence stems from balancing fairness, factual accuracy, and societal values. The mother's presence in the courtroom reflects the struggles often heard in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, moments when individuals confront their past trauma while fighting for stability. She stands not only for herself, but for her child, believing that identity must be rooted in truth, not rumor. She recalls privately how difficult the months after her fiancé's death were adjusting to motherhood alone, carrying grief while defending her child's legitimacy, and enduring accusations about motives she claims she never had. Every step she takes in this courtroom feels like reclaiming her narrative from the family's perspective. However, this case is about protecting the memory of someone they loved. The grandmother views her grandson through a lens shaped by decades of responsibility and emotional investment. She raised him from childhood, filled the void left by his mother's absence, and formed a bond that mirrored that of a mother and son. Her instincts, although not rooted in science, stem from protectiveness and fear. Fear that the grandson she nurtured is being misrepresented. Fear that the lineage she safeguarded is being entrusted to a child she doubts belongs to the family. She speaks with the conviction of someone who believes deeply that motives matter, and that money has a way of revealing intentions. The prospect of inheritance, land, and trust funds only heightens her emotional boundaries. Judge Lake, perceptive as always, understands that the emotional stakes here rival those addressed in the Divorce Course podcast, where litigants grapple with distrust, miscommunication, and competing narratives. She reminds the courtroom that while suspicion may feel justified at times, the law does not operate on assumption. She highlights the principle of adverse inference in Evidence Act discussions, the idea that missing evidence or silence can influence interpretation, but she warns both sides not to rely solely on implication. Paternity must be determined by genetic proof, not by intuition or interpersonal history, as these reflections settle in the room. The mother presents the written acknowledgement of paternity signed by the deceased father. The document is not legally binding proof of biology, but it is a symbolic representation of his intent. Judge Lake examines it, noting how frequently, in family law cases, intent plays a major role, particularly when children are involved. The acknowledgement suggests that the deceased man believed strongly enough to claim the child publicly. This aligns with broader themes explored in Adoption Stories' full episodes, where identity and acceptance are sometimes determined not only by biology but by the emotional decisions adults make for children. Yet, the grandmother counters that belief with her memories of conversations where her grandson doubted his ability to have children. She claims he confided in her about fears of sterility. Judge Lake weighs this testimony carefully, understanding that parental figures often receive intimate disclosures, but also warning that personal fears do not equate to medical diagnosis. The courtroom witnesses how personal recollection and factual evidence collide, and how the legal system must remain grounded in verifiable truth. What intensifies the situation further is the fractured communication revealed throughout the hearing. The mother learning about her fiancé's death through social media, rather than directly from the family, reveals a deep breakdown in trust. Judge Lake identifies this as a turning point in understanding why both sides distrust one another. It mirrors themes commonly explored in DNA test people regret taking discussions, where individuals pursue truth only to uncover deeper emotional wounds or relationships strained by years of silence. In this courtroom, those hidden tensions come fully into view as testimony continues. Judge Lake turns her attention to the deceased father's biological father, who surprisingly brings balance to the situation. He admits to personal failings, acknowledges moments when he wasn't the father he wished he had been, and recognizes that his limited involvement in his son's life shaped the strained dynamics within the family. His humility introduces a refreshing sense of sincerity, demonstrating something frequently highlighted in legal and emotional wellness podcasts, that acknowledging one's past mistakes is often the first step toward justice and healing. He also expresses genuine belief that the child is related to him, a belief rooted not in denial or defensiveness, but in observation and emotional recognition. He speaks of seeing himself in the baby's features and mannerisms. His testimony, although emotional, reinforces the point that families often base their truths on perception, even when science has not yet spoken. Judge Lake respects his honesty while emphasizing once more that DNA test results must determine the legal reality as tensions heighten. Family members argue over who cared for the deceased man during difficult times, who supported him during emotional struggles, and who he confided in most closely. These disputes often surface in paternity cases where unresolved family wounds resurface. Judge Lake must consistently remind the courtroom that character disputes, suspicions of cheating, and personal grievances, reminiscent of DNA test cheating stories, do not serve as evidence. They may explain emotional bias, but cannot dictate judicial outcome. One of the most emotionally gripping elements comes when the grandmother recounts why she never voiced her doubts while her grandson was alive. She feared shattering his hope, knowing how deeply he longed for a child. This confession deepens Judge Lake's understanding of the grandmother's motivations. While her doubts now seem sharp and painful, they stem from an emotional attempt to protect her grandson from disappointment. The court sees clearly that grief, not greed, amplifies her reactions. However, Judge Lake also recognizes that grief does not negate legal responsibility. She stresses that speculative doubts, no matter how heartfelt, cannot stand against scientific truth. The courtroom's entire purpose is to remove uncertainty, to allow the child at the center of this case to grow with undeniable clarity about their biological identity. In doing so, the law protects the child's future, including potential claims to Supreme Court child support-related rights, inheritance, and familial belonging. The mother's composure wavers at moments, but she maintains a consistent narrative. She lived with her fiancé, shared daily life with him, attended medical appointments together, and built a family structure that he publicly supported. Judge Lake views this narrative as credible and cohesive, although emotional. The grandmother, however, continues to insist that the mother manipulated her grandson, accusing her of using the child as leverage for financial security. These claims are common in high-conflict family cases, especially when money or legacy is involved. But Judge Lake remains firm. Accusations are not evidence. The father's testimony becomes an anchor that steadies the courtroom. He recalls private conversations where his son expressed excitement about becoming a father. He describes joy, hope, and pride, sentiments that contradict the grandmother's doubts. Judge Lake must balance these accounts carefully, recognizing that truth often lies between competing emotional narratives, and so, the tension returns to the envelope, the silent, objective answer that will shape the lives of everyone in the room. Judge Lake reinforces that once the results are read, the courtroom must shift from suspicion to acceptance, from conflict to clarity. She explains that this shift mirrors the core purpose of jurisprudence, resolving societal conflicts through objective truth so that justice can be served, regardless of personal feelings. Finally, as she lifts the envelope, the room grows impossibly still. The second the seal breaks, the entire courtroom experiences that universally familiar sensation often described in legal storytelling podcasts. A moment where time seems to freeze because the outcome will rewrite everything. As Judge Lauren Lake unfolds the DNA report, the air in the courtroom feels impossibly heavy. This is the moment where emotion must surrender to science, where personal narratives collide with objective truth. Everyone present, the mother, the grieving grandmother, the distant yet reflective biological father, and the entire courtroom audience seem suspended between hope and dread. In paternity cases, especially those involving loss, identity, and inheritance, the question of biological connection becomes more than a legal matter. It becomes the intersection where the relationship between law and justice is most clearly tested. Before reading the result, Judge Lake pauses deliberately. She understands that for some families, the truth delivered by a DNA test brings closure, while for others, it unravels the stories they've told themselves for years. She reminds the courtroom that what is about to be disclosed is free of bias, speculation, or emotional coloring. It is pure evidence, the type of truth that the legal field, podcasts like Truth Changes Everything, and academic studies on the concept of justice in jurisprudence place at the very center of understanding. She emphasizes that once this truth is known, the courtroom's emotional storms must settle, because the child's identity, future, and legal protections depend on this moment. The mother's eyes fill with guarded hope. She has defended her child's right to belong, fought against accusations of manipulation, and resisted being portrayed as someone chasing an oil trust or land claim. For months, she has carried the burden of others' doubts. To her, this result represents validation, not only of her child's identity, but of the relationship she shared with the deceased man. Her memories, the hospital visits, the pregnancy conversations, the signed acknowledgement, all of it hinges on these results. Across from her, the grandmother braces herself. Her grief has shaped every word she has spoken. Her attachment to her grandson, whom she raised like a son, has influenced every doubt, every suspicion, every accusation. She fears that the legacy she protected may be entangled in uncertainty. She also fears that if the child is indeed her great-grandson, she must confront the guilt of doubting him, guilt that may echo in her heart forever. She reflects inwardly on the emotional threads of this case, threads similar to those examined in recovery-centered stories like Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals must face uncomfortable truths to begin healing. The biological father of the deceased man stands solemn, aware that this moment is bigger than any personal regret or memory he carries. In a rare blend of vulnerability and acceptance, he acknowledges internally that he was not always present in his son's life. Yet he hopes that the truth will pave the way for him to form a bond with the grandchild he believes resembles him, a chance for redemption, an opportunity to rewrite a legacy fractured by distance and mistakes. Stories of unexpected family connections, much like those found in adoption stories, full episodes, echo in his mind, reminding him that family sometimes emerges from moments of unexpected truth. Judge Lake begins reading. The silence is suffocating. Every breath in the room seems suspended. And then, the answer. The DNA analysis confirms a biological connection between the child and the deceased man's father. This means the child is the biological descendant of the man the mother claims as the father. The scientific conclusion is clear, definitive, and based on genetic markers that leave no room for doubt. It is the kind of clarity that legal scholars cite when